Hello, friends and gamers, and welcome to the Fortress, and welcome to the Think Tank there with Wintermute. So, as you guys have noticed, I haven't been putting my videos up just because I'm lazy. But we're going through our deep dive here of Global War 1936 version 4. So we are now currently sitting at chapter 9, I believe. Yeah, if I'm looking at that correctly.
Oh, I thought, are we talking about chapter 9? I thought we were going to continue that debate about the fallacy of governments being beneficial or being benevolent, and that's not a thing.
Yes. Well,
Or we're going to save that one for the WhatsApp.
We'll save that for the WhatsApp. Yeah.
Okay.
We always have really
All right,
intricate...
fine. We'll do global war. We'll do global war.
We always have fairly interesting, well, I think they're interesting conversations there about different things. And one of the things we're discussing now is, what would you put it? How would you put it?
That no government can be benevolent.
Right. Yeah. You are
that's an impossibility, and that governments are parasitic to society.
Yeah. Well,
I absolutely believe that. That's how I would sum it up. That's my position.
All right. Well, I would disagree just because I think, because government is encompassing a lot of things. Anyways, but when you
we almost did start that conversation.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's like saying government is like saying, only the Sith deal in absolutes, right? So the government is a fairly big absolute. So, yeah, anyways, let's not get into that.
Okay.
I just think once in a while it would be worth doing a podcast just for some of the stuff we discussed. I think it would be fun. Okay, we are discussing the combat movement.
Combat movement. Now, there's something I want to bring up that's in this vein. And I have thought about this myself. And when
you didn't have any help. Just kidding. Right. You thought about yourself. You didn't have any help. All right, go on.
But I want to kind of explore this, and I think we've talked about this a little bit. Why do we have a combat and a non-combat movement phase? Why don't we just have a movement phase? And somebody actually did pose that question to the chief designer on Discord, and he said that it was actually tried. It was tried, but it led to a lot of problems that they could not iron out, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. Right. But that was an interesting concept because I personally think it makes more sense. Again, right off the initial knee-jerk reaction that makes sense. You just have a combat phase. You don't really need combat and non-combat movement phases. Just merge them together into a movement phase, and then you conduct your combats, and then you conduct any sort of exploitation movement or a landing of aircraft and things like that. But that's a discussion for another time. But that was brought up during the discussions on Discord about movement and versus combat movement in two different phases. I just thought that was interesting and worth mentioning.
No, that is interesting. I think, though theoretically a person could pile them together, it's sometimes nice to separate things out because then you could keep things organized, especially in a complex game like this. It's like if you combine all the movements and all the combat movements, that gets a little bit.
I'll say I've never liked the fact that they're separate because I think it's gamey. Now, more so in the old Axis and Allies, where they changed the rule in the more recent iterations to where you could move in non-combat into a zone you took.
Right. Yeah.
That was something that exists within the more recent iterations of Axis and Allies. I never liked that because I think part of when you're calculating combats is having to think about, well, okay, what if that combat goes bad?
Oh,
and I end up there. Okay, great. I didn't lose my good stuff because I took all my hits on my infantry, but then I got no infantry left, and now that puts him in that territory. He could really come in and crunch.
Right. It would put in like a fog of war. And I think that's something that is
worth thinking about in a game like this.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I would see it as a type of fog of war where you don't know the outcome of the combats until the combat concludes, and already at that point your units are committed somewhere else. So I think that's an interesting idea for sure.
And that's why people conceptually, I would like to see, I like the idea of combat and non-combat movement being, or just one movement phase. You just move, then you roll your combats, and then you do your exploitation movement and things like that, and then that's it. You're done. And you know what? If you made a miscalculation, and that's part of the learning curve. For a game. I like that. I'm not saying everybody else like that.
That's an interesting thought. But
I have wanted to play test a variation of the rules that was played that way personally.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. That'd be fun to try out, I think. Well, here we go. So the first thing that they start us off with is declarations. Basically, you have to declare all combats moving units accordingly. And they list out all the combats that a person would do, or all the combat movements a person would do. Attrition attacks, border clashes, airborne assaults, strategic bombing, and the like. Carpet bombing of land units, amphibious assaults go in last, I guess, and then convoy raiding. So does it matter what order? I don't think so. Yeah, it just lists the type of combats.
Now there's a bunch of preamble to that about like required to use combat movement when declaration of war is possible.
So that's a really interesting one, right? Like
that's very different.
Yeah, it's very different because you don't really know what's going to be combat movement or not, right? Like sometimes you just don't see that a person has a potential to attack you theoretically, right? And in other words, certain times you would, of course.
This goes hand in hand with the way that they've restricted the when and where you can declare war, because before you could declare war at any moment during an opponent's turn. They've reined that in, and I think we both agree that's a good thing. They've reined that in, and this goes hand in hand with that as that's part of the reining in process. This is how they've decided to handle this.
Yeah. I guess, is it at all possible? There's a few odd times that you're going to be passing through people's like ships and aircraft on air patrol, but other times I don't think it would be of concern. Like aircraft can't scramble just yet, especially on people's if they have nothing there to scramble to, no combat to scramble to, right? So
it says if the attacking player, so this is whoever's the active player, the attacking player wants to move into a C zone that contains units from another alliance at peace with him. The attacking player must move during the combat movement phase. So in some ways, this does take your non-combat movement considerations and pull them into the combat movement phase. Now it only says if they can declare war on you. So if the USSR is still at 10 IPP, it's just you guys just do your turn, and it's not a consideration. But this does cause people, once the shooting starts, you are going to have to take time and think about your moves and ask your opponent and talk with them. I think this is going to probably have a bit of a learning curve, and this is the third sort of thing that I think players getting used to this edition are going to have to really be lenient with each other. While it's like, oh yeah, okay, whoa, hold on, Frank, back up a second. Okay, this is how we technically have to do that in this edition, and I know we're not used to that, but this is how we have to kind of. You have to retrain yourself. You got to retrain yourself. So that's definitely one that I think would be that's the one that rises to like, okay, this is really worth keeping an eye on and helping each other through.
That's
the learning or relearning process.
I do like this one quite a bit though. Like this requirement. The surface of it too, I find it, does it need to be in there? But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me, because before it used to be that, let's say you do stuff, before it used to be something like this, that you only move your stuff on combat movement if you plan on declaring war or were at war with somebody. That's when you would move your units. In this case, so what could have happened then is you would be the German player and start moving your stuff on the board, and then the Russians would declare a war on you on the non-combat movement phase. In this case, it means, when you're going through C zones, never mind. I was just thinking like there's going to be times and places where this would actually be much beneficial to the attacker as opposed to the defender, right? Because it means that you still get that entire non-combat movement place to react to somebody's attacking your units in the attacking phase, as opposed to.
I think that there's probably some nuance to this. That isn't obvious yet until you've played it a couple times, and suddenly it's like that third or fourth time you're doing it. Wait a minute. Okay, I see. There's an interesting interaction in a way that isn't obvious. So I think this is probably going to be falls into that category.
All right, let's move on. So I think we've hammered that to death. Land combat movement is pretty simple. Units cannot combine, move into an enemy possessed land zone, and keep moving unless they are blitzing. And they say militia can only start and end combat move in home
this is that question that every new player asks. Well, my cavalry attacks here, so can I just keep on? But they didn't have any units, or can I keep? No, you cannot. Blitzing is what allows you to do that. Blitzing is the explicit, because they get there even though there's nobody there. they still have to engage the
That's
local
right.
population. They
Right,
still have
exactly.
to seize resources. They have
Yeah,
to seize railheads. They have
spend
to do
time
things when they
securing
get
there.
there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Tanks are explicitly designed to kind of ignore that, blitz through the enemy, and then keep going while the backup units are the ones who take care of that.
Yeah.
And this isn't aimed at this is aimed at newer people who might be watching this. Obviously, the more experienced players know this.
That's right. Yeah.
And militia can only start and end combat movement in home country.
Yeah.
Now, this does answer a question though about militia being able to be moved on a transport.
Oh yeah, that's true.
You can transport militia around within the home country. You look, but it has to end. It can't stay on the transport.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So that is that I think that's pretty clear right there. And I like that. I think that makes sense. And there are cases where countries do kind of are in this weird situation or they have chunks of the country that were cut in half or whatever. So it's like, well, I want to reinforce that because I don't have factories up there or whatever. Okay, but I've got some militia. Great, let's do something. I think that's fine. That makes perfect sense.
That's true.
And I think that would happen.
Yeah, that answers that question for sure. Aircraft combat movement. Aircraft may fly over enemy land and sea zones containing enemy units if there are no enemy fighters in that zone. Aircraft may not fly over nations that are not at war with or aligned with, except when crossing canals and straits. Aircraft must save enough movement points to return to a suitable landing spot after combat. And then it speaks about aircraft. They have -2 movement if they're taking off from a damaged carrier. Yeah.
So that clarifies what happens with damaged carriers. Damaged carriers can still hold 2 aircraft. Fleet carriers can still hold 2 aircraft. Because a lot of people got that mistaken. That came up a lot. What people are like, well, no, they're damaged. They can't. No, that's
they can't take
Axis and Allies / optional move territory.
That's right. Yeah.
Core rules now. There's still a penalty. There's still something you have to consider,
which is really good.
Which I think is fair, completely fair. They still have potential to be useful, but they're just until you get it repaired, it's limping along, and so are the fighters.
The only issue I have with the only concern I can see with this one, which is probably a minor concern, since canals, they're not always just short little canals. Like when we think of canals, we think of the Suez Canal, short one, separating by 2 territories. But then there's the longer kind of canals, like the one going from the White Sea up north down south, and that spans like, was it 2 territories at least? So you could potentially somehow game the system a little bit by using that to skip territories, right? Using your fighters to move a little bit further than they would have otherwise been able to. And in theory, with the 36
and actually, you're right, and that's a point that has come up with in any sort of dudes on a map game. Where the way especially when it comes to the, because like a lot of areas, the land zones, there's a much greater concentration of land zones than there are sea zones in like the area next to it. So okay, well, I have to go 1, 2, 3, or I can just go 1, 2 kind of a thing, that's, I think that all boils down to the way the map is designed.
And honestly, it's not going to be an issue.
Create some weird situations.
It will.
And historical situations too, because I was talking with a buddy of mine who said the way the map is cut up right now, I mean, British bombers could reach Berlin really easily, really early in the war, but they can't do it until they have advanced, they have to get that technology to be able to comfortably reach Germany from mainland Britain, and that's just the way. I think that's just the way the map is cut. But if they can reach it, then you have to ask yourselves, okay, well, how does that change the game, from a design perspective, and take all those factors into account.
And a lot of the issues too, like this here one with long canals being able to jump territories. I mean, it's not going to come up ever, really. Like, there's not going to be any circumstance with that. So is it worth changing just for one little feature that may come up and not, like, say the Germans build an aircraft carrier and it's off the coast of, say, Halifax, near close to North America. Now, theoretically, it can use the St. Lawrence River to strike with aircraft bombing all the way to San Francisco almost, right? Something like that. Quite a ways away, just because they use that to jump a lot of territories right into the interior. Because that's a long canal, right? And do something that way. Well, is that ever going to come up in any meaningful way? Not really. And if it does, then it's such a far-flung thing that it's just not going to matter.
It's possible. It's just a far-flung. It's like that one time in that you had that one D&D character do that crazy one in a million thing, you know, okay. Now if that becomes a consistent tactic of an enemy,
that's right,
well then then it does need to be addressed. And I do know that some designers are blasé about things like that. It's like, well, look, if it can happen, it will. Now, when it comes to die rolling and percentages, yes, if it can, even if there's a 0.5% chance it'll happen, you need to take that into consideration. However, something like this, I think, is a little bit more on the fringe that the players are deliberately doing something bizarre.
That's
or
right,
it just lines up in a way where the players go, I see an opportunity here nobody foresaw coming.
Yep, for sure. All right, moving on. Maritime Air Patrol. So I for whatever reason, well, no, this is not the confusing part. So Maritime Air Patrol is good. Moving on. So fighters, they all have Maritime Air Patrol of 1, except for seaplanes, which they have 2. Some of it's bumped up with long-range aircraft technology, which is great. I don't think I have anything to comment on that.
The notable one is medium bomber goes up to 2. That stayed the same. Seaplanes stay at 2, but then they get the bonus of going up to 3 if they have both long-range aircraft technology and a seaplane base. And
that gets them quite far into the water for sure.
Yeah, and I have some observations on that when we talk about units specifically.
Sounds good.
On patrol, I don't think map changed dramatically in how it works.
No. I mean, they threw a few more examples out there, which I found really good
because there was a ton of questions about the way it was worded in the last edition. A lot came from me.
This one, it could be from me. Some of the questions I probably didn't read the rule book as thoroughly as I should have, but I was always confused by this. Is like, okay, so does one aircraft see everything in that sea zone or just one thing in the sea zone? And can a destroyer theoretically hit everything in the sea zone or not if it's paired? I just was confused by that, right? And I don't know why. Maybe it did state in the rules, but I found this part to be quite confusing.
So let's see, Germany and Britain are at war. Germans destroyer naval transport, the submarine choose decline combat. Right. Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward example. Great Britain and Italy are at war. British submarines enters the sea zone with an Italian tactical bomber on map, as well as a destroyer. The Italian player could decline to engage the submarine and allow it to move to the next sea zone, but it decides instead to attack the submarine. He could pair the destroyer with the tactical bomber. Increasing the chances of hitting the submarine. Since the submarine cannot hit aircrafts, on and on. Since the submarine cannot hit the aircraft, this would give a chance to hit the submarine to hit a target to hit. Excuse me. He elects to use both the tactical bomber and the destroyer. Both units get 1 shot at the submarine using the defense values. They both miss. Submarine gets to return fire. After this single round, the submarine may continue its movement. Its movement range is not affected. So it does not stop the submarine's movement. You are taking a pot shot at the submarine.
That's right.
Now, the way I read this, one question I had was about Maritime Air Patrol paired. Okay, you have 3 submarines in a zone. I go in with an airplane on Maritime Air Patrol. I can obviously only hit 1. I go in with I pair it up with the destroyer. I roll 2 dice. I get 2 hits on those dice. Is that 2 dead subs or 1 dead sub? Now, I've always played it 2 dead subs.
Right.
And most of the people I play with, I think, would agree with me. That's 2 dead subs. They each take a shot. There just happens to be more than 1 hard target. However, it can be argued that one plane, 1 sub, 1 destroyer paired plane, 1 sub.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I found confusing. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
So I think that is a question that I would like to see.
For me, that's the way I always saw it. Is like, okay, so you're pairing 2 units. They're 2 units paired going after 1 sub. So it should only be, against the 1. But then I was confused by that. And I in all my games, I've been confused because there's some people that played it this way, some people that way. And I've just always kind of left it up to the group decision because I was like, I don't want to finagle this one myself.
I really am of the opinion that it is better off being, if 1 plane is paired with a destroyer, those are 2 attack rolls, meaning you can kill up to 2 units.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but my opinion is
2 eligible units. Units being submarines.
My thinking is, okay, so the plane is spotting a sub and it calls in the destroyer to take care of the submarine. So it's not like suddenly the plane wanders off and sees the second submarine, right? Like it's just still keeping track on that sub. Now I know it's not one airplane, I know it's not one submarine
And
and
I
one
think
destroyer, right? It's
I think,
actually
and
a
this is
series. Yeah.
this is going on the way the designers tend to it's like, well, look, it's not a single thing, it's not a single action.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
So with
right.
that same logic, I would say, well, yeah, okay, it's yeah, they got lucky and they got two subs.
Yeah, yeah.
In an instance when there were two subs to be hit.
Mm-hmm.
That and that's why I think that does go in line with kind of other kind of design principles that I've seen.
Yeah. It's just not clear, and maybe it should be a little bit more clear, and maybe it is clear and I just skipped, just missed it. I have read through this, but it just I don't know, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. Now, one other thing I would say in regards to this example, they should, because I always think that they should write a manual that the first time reader gets it, right? So one of the things that me and Wintermute were discussing is perhaps they should have talked about units before they talked about movement and combat movement, just to kind of really lay out the groundwork of this is all the stuff that goes on in the game, and this is how they interact in the game, right? That's the reason why a lot of manuals, they'll start off with kind of, this is what's in the book. These are what the cards look like. This is, the action cards, and we have strategy cards, and then we have this kind of stuff. And they kind of unpack it, and then they introduce stuff later on. So I think in the same sense, they should do this as well. Talk about the units first before they talk about the combat, the non-combat, etc., so that people can kind of get it. Because if a first-person reader is looking through this and say, okay, so submarines, pot shots and stuff, what about destroyers? What about if a destroyer is passing through an aircraft maritime air patrol? How does that work? And maybe I'm just stretching out what a novice new player would look like, right? What they would look at things like.
Yeah, and there's I already, let's see, it can and I mean, so to your example, if I have a unit on map, you move a destroyer in there, the map can ignore it. It can choose. Okay, do I want to attack you or not?
Right. But what I'm saying is that in the example, the submarine can continue moving on after that's taken that pot shot. Well, it doesn't specifically say in here that it's only submarines that can continue to do that, right? It's like, okay, so what if there's just a single aircraft on maritime air patrol?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And a destroyer moves to there. Does it also get the pot shot before moving on, or is it stopped in combat, locked in until one of them wins?
I think that I think you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. And in this example though, my understanding is that is a standard combat. Your movement will end.
But it's not stated here.
It's not stated, but it should be. You're right.
It should be.
It should be a standard combat.
I mean, it's probably stated later on, but it's one of those things that rule books should be written that you don't have to realize something later on that changes your previous opinion.
No,
right?
no, yeah, and I didn't quite get what you were saying at first. Yeah, now
like,
I do. Yeah.
In this case, because we're familiar with the game, we know that submarines, they have this submerge feature, right, where they submerge, and maybe it should be listed in that because of the submarine has a submerge feature. It can conclude combat after one round and then continue on its combat. Maybe they should state why it can do that as opposed to just launching it through, right?
And you know what? And that's actually a good point. Note that defending submarines may decline combat. Let's see, hold on. Yeah. Note that defending submarines may decline combat unless the attacker has an aircraft on map. Aircraft on map may be paired 1-to-1 with destroyers when attacking submarines. The only place it says that the submarine may continue its movement is down here in the example. It doesn't say it can continue its movement up here.
Which is
this? Yeah. Okay. The more we read this, the more I see that there's some issues with this.
Yeah, it should be up there as well too, because examples are something that if you feel like you don't have a grasp of how it works, you read the example, but you shouldn't have a key concept in the example. You shouldn't have a key concept of the rule in an example. It should be in the rule set itself, right? That's
later today. Now I'm going to be very busy today because I have I'm preparing for my Knoebels trip with the kids.
Right. Yeah.
So I may not have time to put a message on the main board, but yeah, I'm going to sit down a little later and maybe really noodle through this one, and maybe there's some issues there. There's questions that need to be presented.
Yeah. I mean, if there's already, like, from a brief reading that we've both done of it, there's already a couple issues that pop up. There might be a couple more.
Yeah.
So, ending a patrol, an aircraft on maritime air patrol may opt to return to land zone or carrier using its map range during the non-combat movement phase. This can occur in the same player turn as a patrol state. So this is the same as before. Elimination, yeah, that's the same as before. Carrier-based aircraft, you have the same combat maritime air patrol as the land-based counterparts. That's about it. Defending aircraft on carriers always act as if they're on MAP. That's all good. And I think that
basically
covers
the same as what it has been.
Yeah.
And they give an example to kind of, I think, clarify that right here about how that works. Because there's a lot, I know there's a lot of questions about that. Okay, well, if I'm based on a carrier, but then I move to away, but then I have this and that and the other thing, and it's like, yeah, it's a little messy.
Yeah, it is,
but I think it there's still, we'll just have to play it with the way it interacts with a lot of other aspects.
That's right. Yeah. Air transports and strategic bombers may pick up airborne infantry before or during the combat movement and attack one enemy possessed land zone in an airborne assault.
Now, this is the fact that they can pick up at any point during their movement is something a lot of players miss.
Right.
And I believe it was that way in 3rd edition.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. To my surprise.
You know, a lot of players thought that they had to leave that airborne, that had to start the turn in its transport. And there's no, it can fly 3, pick up, drop off, and then land.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it goes for the same thing with non-combat movement with transporting units as well. Same story. Which, again, I guess makes sense from a 6-month period of time, right?
Yeah, and really the logistics of trying to line that up. You would only be able to use airborne every other turn.
Something like that, yeah.
You know, because you take the territory, but you can't land aircraft in that territory you just took.
Well, you'd have to use them in sequence. You'd have to use you'd have to have 2 airborne units, and then you could definitely do it, right?
Well, no, what I'm saying is but that individual airborne unit can only be used in an airborne drop every other turn.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're right. You would have basically you would probably start building.
No, would it though? I don't think it would, because you would drop your unit off, right, with your aircraft, and then the aircraft would land somewhere here. The next turn, you pick them up and drop them off the next area.
No, that's what I'm saying. The logistics of having to have them in the same zone to start.
Oh, I see.
That's what I was saying. This is good. I like this. This makes sense. Otherwise, you're doing a lot more logistical legwork trying to line it up to get them in the same zone together before you can.
I understand what you mean. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So I much prefer the leniency of this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I understand.
Naval combat movement. If moving surface ships into a sea zone container, the aircraft may decline combat unless the attacker also has aircraft present. If there's going to be combat, the attacker may designate a screening force and continue. Okay, so this answers part of the question we had before. It does, but this probably should have been addressed in that same paragraph.
Perhaps, or at least referred to it or something.
So the aircraft on maritime air patrol engaging a sub is a pot shot, for lack of a better term. And the sub keeps on going. Subs don't need a screening force. They don't have to submerge. They just keep on moving. That's what all the examples are showing. Now, it might explicitly say that in the rules for submarines or somewhere else in here. But that would be worth clarifying probably, overall. But here it says basically if it's a surface ship against a plane on map, then it is a standard combat, and the only way you can move after that is with a screening force.
Yeah, makes sense.
What's that? Yes. At some point, I've got to call you guys back though to help pack up.
So this one here also, it speaks about after this single round, surviving ships may continue their movement. Their movement range is not affected, but this is in regards to submerged enemy submarines. So you can't use your submarines as kind of a blocking force in this. You can't use your submarines as a blocking force in this, right? You can't just, throw a screening force.
Non-submerged enemy submarines. These may decline combat unless they has however, the submarines may elect. One round of combat occurs immediately. Okay. So when you're talking about submarines don't block movement.
No, they don't. No.
They take pot shots.
Yeah.
That's how that works. They take a single round of combat attacks, kind of like a maritime air patrol against it, and then all the other surface warships goes, oh well, okay, they sunk the they sunk that destroyer. Shit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we got to keep going.
Yeah.
But they get to but those ships get to, one combat round occurs immediately. So the subs would still have first strike and target selection, but then all the ships get to defend.
Yeah. So in regards to submarines, you don't need to set up a screening force. You essentially just power through it.
Yeah,
and the submarine does whatever it wants to do, and you just power through it. But in regards to aircraft, it's not explicitly stated, like in the stuff with submarines, that the submarines are different, right? Like it doesn't say
submarines are different. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't say in this that submarines are different. It just simply says this is what happens in submarines, this is what happens in Air Force. And a person could kind of cross-contaminate their conception of how it works. It's like, say, okay, so is it the same thing for both? And it would just be...
It's already going to happen.
Yeah. And
this happened a lot with third edition, where you've got a concept here, which is similar but different to this concept, but they're not separated enough.
Yeah. And I understand you can't state all the circumstances that wouldn't happen. Like you can't state the negatory. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but you can't state all the things that certain units can't do, because that would be almost an infinite list, right? It's hard to encompass that. But
I'm going to disagree with you on that one.
If you
some of the best rule books I've ever read explicitly state, don't just tell you what you can do, but they also explicitly state.
I agree, but there's a limitation. It's like a submarine can't go get you coffee, right? Like, they're not going to state that type of deal, right? Because there's certain things that you just simply, within the confines of the game, it could be
right within the confines of the game.
Yeah.
However, I do feel that there are games, and version 3 is one of them.
Yeah.
That okay, this is how it works. Okay, we get how it works. And then there's nothing else. And that's where a lot of the questions come from. Okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? And how about when this happens? And sometimes you should take the time to explain not just how it works, but what it prohibits and what it allows. And it's got to be on a case by case basis.
Yeah, it should.
And if you and this is from experience, if I sit there and I write a rule out, and as soon as and then I'll leave it, I'll come back a couple hours later and reread it.
Yeah.
And if there's any question in my mind that I even have a whiff of, maybe I should add that sentence to kind of clarify that point, then I need to add the sentence to clarify that.
That's
point.
right. Yeah.
And I will deliberately give myself a mental gap.
Yeah.
And this is a report writing technique, and it's a writing technique in general, where you write something, but then you literally get up and walk away and don't even think about it for another hour or two. And then you come back and you reread it after that. And you will catch a lot more issues that you missed when you first wrote it, as opposed if you just proofread it right away. So if you have the time to do that, then that's one technique that's available to you.
Yeah. Well, what I agree with you 100%, and it makes sense. I was just mostly stating that I understand from a design perspective that you can't really, because the argument would be like, well, we can't tell you that, destroyers aren't stuck, and destroyers can power through, and destroyers can't do this, and destroyers, it's what I'm saying is it's hard to list off all the stuff a nation can do, even though it would be advisable, and the best rule book would be that way. It's much easier just to put in underneath submarines. Submarines are different. They do not require a screening force to be detached to deal with a submarine.
Yes, I agree with you there. Yes.
It saves you one line of text here, would save you 16 on that one, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's you're right.
All right. So now
it gives some examples, and I think these examples are fine. Yeah, they're all they're basically almost exactly what we just talked about.
Yeah.
If moving submarines into a sea zone containing enemy ships without an aircraft or map, the submarines may ignore the ships and continue moving. The submarines may elect to engage in combat, attacking all enemy surface ships. If moving submarines into a sea zone containing an enemy aircraft or map, the aircraft on map, optionally together with that's weird. Optionally together with a pair of destroyers, may elect to engage the submarines.
Plural.
No, advanced submarines may only be attacked this way solely by aircraft on map. Okay, good to clarify that. Other units may not participate or be taken by casualties. One round of combat occurs immediately during the combat movement phase. After the single round, surviving submarines may continue their movement. Their movement range is not affected.
So it implies
ships, I'm sorry.
Implies to this contextually that my previous games I've played, or one of my previous games I've played, is the maritime air patrol and the destroyer can hit multiple submarines, not just one.
I don't know whether it said that. I didn't get that out of there.
Well, it says if moving submarines into a zone containing an enemy aircraft, singular, on maritime air patrol, the aircraft option together with a pair of destroyers,
Okay.
multiples, may elect to engage the submarines, plural, right? So it seems to imply that you can engage multiple submarines with a single aircraft and multiple destroyers. I don't really know, but a single destroyer, I'm assuming in that case.
I think you're still going to get people who are going to argue,
fair enough.
one plane, one destroyer, one sub.
Yeah. It's true.
And I'm not saying they're wrong.
Yeah.
If moving ships into zone containing, basically transports are non-existent for movement purposes. You cannot combat move through a strait or canal the same player turn a player captures its controlling land zone.
That's fair. Okay, so this is a good time to pause and put in a commercial break and relaunch in a few seconds.
Today we're being sponsored by we're from the government and we're here to help. Scary words. People learn that lesson. Scary words.
That's right. All right.
Okay. Good.
You good?
We're good.
All right.
Yep.
So screening is a form of combat which can be used to clear sea zones of enemy units, clearing the path from moving other units through. The attacking player divides the screening force and continuing force, and the screening force then attacks units present in the sea zone in the combat phase for purposes of clearing the path. If you fail to eliminate all aircraft and enemy surface warships, they have lost their screening battle, and the continuing force is forced to retreat. The continuing force is forced to retreat. The screening force may be victorious even if all the screening units are eliminated. If the screening force wins the battle, the continuing force may either carry out an amphibious assault in the sea zone, which has just been cleared out, or move into an adjacent sea zone. If any enemy naval units are present, combat occurs. The continuing force cannot further be divided into another screening force and continuing force. Even if there are no enemy naval units present, the continuing force cannot carry out an amphibious assault from the sea zone. Okay, so that really lists out all the answers, all the questions I had, and resolves it all nicely. Well written. Good job. Yeah, my thinking was like, so theoretically, could you do an amphibious assault? They answered it. Well done.
I am curious to hear from people how often screening forces are used.
I use them. And look, it's not so much that you use them, but it prevents other things from happening, right? So for instance, in previous Axis and Allies, 1940, you throw out a couple of blocker ships, right? A couple of destroyers here, there, everywhere. The fact that now you can screen past that blocking forces means that people don't throw up blocking forces. So the sheer act of having them prevents something else from happening. It's like, screening forces aren't used, but the threat of screening forces being used resolves the problem I found very irritating in other games.
Yeah, that's another discussion. Yep, that's screening forces, people.
Yeah, right on.
Blockade.
Blockade. Basically, you need three or more surface warships of the same alliance in the sea zone to block any supply paths through that area and blockade all the facilities. That's it.
This is worth noting that this is another one of those rules that people miss a lot, very easily, is that you don't need 3 ships per port. You need 3 ships in the sea zone. And then any number of enemy ports become blocked, but only enemy ports, not ports you are at war with. So you could, like Southeast Asia is a good example. You could still, in theory, lend lease right into, the Allies could lend lease right into French-held Vietnam and rail it right up into China, or however it's laid out that way, or into Hong Kong, because Japan is at war with China and China only. You cannot do anything to blockade foreign ships. That's an act of war. So, and this pops. I know this question pops up a lot. So it's frustrating because I know a lot of players. Okay, blockade that whole area. You can't lend lease. It's like, no, I got a French port there. I can lend lease to him with his permission and send it up here. So no, you can't do that. I'm blockading. Yeah, if you blockade a French port, you're at war with France.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's how that works. and Lend-Lease is very porous.
Yeah, it is.
And I think historically it was too. Lend-Lease is very porous. So, but you only need 3 ships to blockade an entire zone.
Now, one thing I would say they should add into this blockade stuff is something along the lines of, if you want to surround a city, you need to have it blockaded, or the facilities need to be damaged. I think something should be written right here in that regards for blockading, because that's one of the things that people come up with, like, I have the city surrounded, I have all the territories, or, you know, the land zone adjacent to it or whatever. It's like, well, no, it still needs to be blockaded for it to be considered surrounded. And this one's important for the sake of, say, Rome.
This is a lot. Well, there's a lot of major cities right on the coast with ports and whatnot. So it is. And I know there's a lot of misconceptions about how it's actually hard to surround a city.
It's very hard. Yeah,
it's very hard.
What gets me is to, like, you have to also blockade the air, or you have to damage the airfield on there, which I don't think, this is another topic, but I don't think that should be to that degree, because it's like, okay, can an airport really supply everything in that area? For me, I'd just say, okay, an undamaged airport in a city being surrounded could only supply 1 unit, and that's it.
Well, if they had advanced supply rules in the game, they don't. If they had advanced supply rules in the game, I would agree with you totally. But the supply rules are very straightforward and simple. And I'm one to I personally would like to see a like supplies based or like, you know, equipment or supplies based kind of expansion, because I think there is a lot of room there to add a lot of nuance to the game about supplies and surrounding a territory and then forcing it to be out of supply turn after turn after turn, so they get weaker and weaker and weaker, which is a concept I'm familiar with from Europa.
That's what I was going to say.
Now it's a different scale game, so it's not an exact transference. You know, and then the German player, like in Europa, literally has they have to consider, do I sit here and let these Russian stacks that are still holding out near the border? Because that's how I did it. And even John, when I played against him, said, man, that was frustrating, because there's units there with stacks of supply points. And do I tie up resources to just let them slowly die and then just mop up with them? Or do I take the risk and actually just attack them and get them out of the way, free up those units, but at the risk of taking casualties?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and I think that's an interesting element to add to a game. Now, the scale of this game does not necessarily lend itself to that, and the limited 6-month turns.
And also the size of the map is another feature there.
But that as a concept, I think that could be introduced in a particular way into the game through the course of an expansion. And it does give players that, do I take the risk of losing units and just get rid of this, you know, kind of like Yunnan. You know, does the Japanese player finally just say, you know what, do I just keep Yunnan punched, you know, up against that wall, or do I, you know, just roll the dice and just hopefully wipe it out and the damage isn't too bad? Or like, now away from Yunnan, back away from that example, do I let it just sort of die slowly and get weaker and weaker, and then just kind of take it with a minimal force 2 turns from now? I think that's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I think the more, well, not the more, but, you know, sometimes having more choices, strategic, complex choices to make, makes for a much more enjoyable game by giving these problems to a person to solve.
So that's one example I would maybe like to see in an expansion.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah. Naval transports, I think they act exactly the same as before. The land units can't be moved before being picked up. This really basically answers all the questions. Your transport units don't have any combat value, etc., etc.
For newer players watching this question comes up a lot. Naval transports are actually very flexible in how they pick up and land. You can pick up a land units before or during their combat movement, okay, or non-combat movement in this case. So you can pick up a guy from here and a guy from there. You can then drop them off in 2 different zones. They don't have to both go to the same zone. You can drop one here and you can drop one here.
Yeah, the only thing is you have to end your movement there, and
but once you drop off, you're done.
Yeah. Right on. So battle cruisers. Wait, hold on. Scroll up for 1 second. Just I caught something there. Yeah. Okay. No. Good. Battle cruisers as raiders. So this is a new feature.
Now it's worth mentioning that we haven't discussed units yet, but they've gone out of their way to make sure that every naval unit has something interesting to bring to the game besides just a bigger version of whatever, a bigger, more expensive version of whatever a destroyer is.
Yeah.
The destroyer being the most basic surface ship. So heavy carrier, light cruisers, heavy cruisers, battle cruisers, every one of them has their own special rules to govern it now. Some people will like that, some people won't. I do like that. Now, whether I like each individual one, we'll discuss that when we get to the units, but I like that concept. So that's part of the reason this is here. That's one of the reasons I think this is here is this is what battle cruisers are bringing to the board as their special thing beyond just being a 7-7 naval unit.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that concept. But for me, it ties into some other issues I have with naval stuff is like, they don't have any survivability. So I'm not going to really build anything that I don't care about losing, right? Like basically what I'd like to see is an expanded, more complex naval structure. And that would essentially mean more hit points for anything.
Yeah. And actually that was in version 2. That was one of the things my buddy John was going on about. He said, heavy cruisers should have 2 hit points.
Yeah.
They didn't have battle cruisers. Heavy cruisers should have 2 hit points. Fleet carriers, light carriers should have 2. Basically, everything from a heavy cruiser up, just gets a hit point.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
And actually, I agree with that. And I still think that would be a good addition to this game.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm not saying that there are not ripple factors that need to be taken into account with that, but I still doubt you're going to see ships being repaired all that often.
Well, in my game, what I'm doing, so I'm developing a game, what I'm doing is giving everybody a hit point except for destroyers and down, right? Everything else above that gets at least 2 hit points so that they have survivability. Now, the reasoning behind that is I want fleets to limp home to port. I want fleets to kind of come back another day and fight, right? I want people to think about, oh, maybe I should retreat from this combat before I start losing other pieces. And since ships are, they take, some of them take years to build, you want them to have that level of survivability a little bit so you can fight with them another day. Now,
there's plenty of examples where destroyers were damaged and limped back to port and got repaired.
Yeah, that's right. The issue there is, you'll have players who will just take the damage on all their units until everything is down to like 1 hit point and then retreat from the battle. Well, the way to overcome that is by giving everybody a target selection on a roll of 1. So it's like, sure, you might damage everything down to a level of 1, but at that point, these guys rolling a target selection on rolls of 1 will start wiping out your high value units. So you might not want to do it as much. So, there's different ways of getting around that issue. And that's one of the ways I did. Battle cruisers as raiders is an interesting thing. It's trying to recreate some history in there with say the Bismarck, the Kneisenau, and the Scharnhorst as well. To try to, I know Bismarck was not considered a battle cruiser, but Scharnhorst and Kneisenau were, and so that's their attempt in doing this as well, to make them as surface raiders, right? That's the plan with this one. So maybe we should walk through it in detail.
Yes, I am not going to pretend that I have read this in depth or understand it in depth. So, and I know there was a lot of questions about this within the chatter on Discord. So a battle cruiser could be designated as a raider by placing a market underneath it during the combat movement phase. So basically, you designate it as a raider at the beginning of the phase, basically. It may move up to its full movement in the same player turn. While operating as a raider, it has several special abilities. When a raiding battle cruiser is the attacker, it can slip through sea zones containing enemy units, with a battle cruiser die roll deciding if it can successfully slip through.
Should we pause for 1 second as we come up with issues, or do you want to cover that later on?
Well, let me finish this one.
Sure.
If unsuccessful combat occurs. So what do you want to add?
Okay, sorry if I interrupted.
No, that's right. Well, I just felt it was worth completing that thought.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So one quick comment on this is, why did they call it battle cruiser die roll? I find that not the greatest choice of action, right? Well, let's say call it an evade. Call it an evade die roll. If evade die roll succeeds, because what it does is now it limits you to creating another special ability. If you ever created like a commando expansion, say, okay, the commando, they evade combat if they roll this. But it's the exact same thing as a battle cruiser die roll, right? Evading combat. So just name it evade combat die roll, and that would resolve that issue. And then it opens it up so that people, if you're introducing a new expansion with something like an evade feature behind it, you don't have to create another name for something that already exists in the previous game, like a special ability that crosses
keywords. Keywords.
Yeah, exactly.
Keywords. That's it's a core concept that you see in a lot of card games. But I mean, a lot of games use it, but card games in particular.
Right.
So that every time you see that keyword on that card, you know exactly how it works.
Exactly. And another way of doing it is,
if there are any modifiers, then they're in a brackets next to it for that specific instance.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. You know, and I think what they should do
I think you're onto something there.
If they're writing the manual here, if it's something like decline combat, is that a special ability? I mean, I think in version 3 it was. You can decline combat. It was like a special ability of submarines. So put a label on it with a descriptor behind it. Decline combat. This is what decline combat does. Put it in bold in the manual so that people, when they come across as like, decline combat is just not simply a word saying you could decline combat, saying this is a special ability that exists. Look in your appendix for what it actually does, right? Something like that. Look at the unit chart so that people, when they see and reading through and say, oh, they can decline combat, they know that there's strings attached to it and it's marked by this either asterisk or put it in bold or something like that, so that people know that there's more complex thoughts behind decline combat than just simply decline combat. So yeah,
you see the evolution of that concept in full force in modern role-playing games, because that is one of these. Did you ever play D&D Second Edition?
No, I never played any D&D games.
Good for you. Conceptually a fantastic game, but man, the execution of the rules. But those were fine rules at that point. But now people, if you were to try to teach somebody who plays Pathfinder or D&D 5th edition those rules, they would just be like, dude, stop, I'm out.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the core concepts is simplicity.
Simplicity is
consistency.
Key. Yeah, that's right.
And so once you create it, once you establish a concept here, that same concept exists. Once I establish that a ability modifier works this way, every time I refer back to that, it's going to work the same way. And if there's an exception, then that's the rare exception, because that's just that special ability. I took that feat. Okay, well, that means it works this way now. Okay, that's fine. That's the exception to the core rule. However,
that's right.
You go back to D&D Second Edition, it was every time something new came up, there was an entirely new set of rules about how to handle it, rather than building on what was already there. And it was a Don't get me started on THAC0.
Oh yeah.
I was there for those days. I'm that old. Right. I was there for the days of THAC0. Any old gamers will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Never heard of
it. It's like never knowing hunger. It's like good for you. Gotcha. Never knowing what it is to grow up, grow up in the,
that's right.
Worrying about diseases. Okay. That's what it is. Never knowing growing up, never knowing what THAC0 is a blessing.
Right on. Okay. So that's my key point about that, is just open it up to other things so that people recognize it. Also, it could be confusing with a battlecruiser die roll. Like, that's not immediately evident what that is. Like, was that a combat roll? Or whatever, right? Like,
I think you're right that the choice of moniker for that could have been better.
Raider roll or whatever, something like that, right?
Now,
anyways, moving on.
So, all right, when a battlecruiser designated as a raider is the defender, enemy units may ignore it when moving into or through its sea zone without having to engage naval combat. So it's trying to actively avoid any sort of engagement. If the enemy units elect to engage a lone raiding battlecruiser, a battlecruiser die roll decides if the attacking units are successful in engaging, or if the battlecruiser has the option to slip away. If it wants to slip away, it remains in the same sea zone. Okay, so it's basically just dodging the enemy. Big ass sea zone, and it's just skirting the edges. In a cat and mouse game. Okay. Anything you want to add about that?
Well, when I'm reading it, two things slip into my mind. First of all is the lone raiding cruiser. So what happens if I have two raiding cruisers?
My guess is each one is handled separately.
Right.
That's my guess.
I mean, I'm assuming so. Yeah, I'm assuming, because that's what it says later on, is like each die roll is treated as separately. But does that mean, if the attack units are successful in engaging, or if the battlecruiser has an option to slip away? Does that mean if you have two raiding cruisers present, then you lose the option to slip away?
I don't think so. That's weird.
It seems weird, yeah. But
Yeah,
if
but
the
you're right.
enemy units
That's a good
elect to
point.
engage a lone raiding cruiser, a battle cruiser die roll decides if the attack
And
units are
I think
successful.
that's what they meant by saying lone.
Yeah.
That's what I think they meant.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand.
Right. Well, just by context, you realize that it's not meant to be, because it's like in the case of if there's more than one battle cruiser designated as raider in a zone, roll for each one separately. So it's implying, yeah, no. You could attack if there's more than one, but you know, this one kind of slipped me up a little bit. And if it wants to slip away, it remains in the same C zone. So it has the option to slip away. So this slip away that they're using in there is kind of a verb that they're throwing in there.
That they should have worded that better. That could have been worded clear. I think this block could be cleaned up a little bit, but I think that last sentence absolutely could be worded better. If it slips away, it remains okay. It simply stays in the same C zone with no combat occurring.
Right. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. There we go. Because slip away implies that it seems to imply
it's leaving the zone.
That, yeah, and it also means that there's like a special thing going on there, just like decline combat should be in bold, or used to be, you know, it's like this is a special ability. So slip away for me, it's like, oh, that's a special ability. And you read on, it's like, oh, it's not actually slip away. It's like essentially just submerge. So that's it, right? And maybe when we get to read about the units, they'll say something like slip away, special ability. Yeah. Slip away means stay in the same C zone. And you're like, okay, but it would be nice if it was highlighted in this way. And maybe that's what we wanted to do, the units first, so we could kind of read up on it, and then everything would fall into place.
Yeah, we were debating doing the units first before this combat, and this could be part of that reason why.
It would have been resolved as you read through the manual. Yeah.
All right. So if a raiding battle cruiser is located in a C zone with other defending units, it is up to the attacker if he wants to engage the battle cruiser or not. If the attacker wants to engage, the battle cruiser die roll decides if the attacker is successful, or if the battle cruiser has the option to slip away. If the battle cruiser loses the die roll, the battle cruiser defends together with the other units in the C zone in regular combat. If the battle cruiser wins the die roll and elects to slip away, it stays in the same zone but avoids the ensuing combat. So, okay, again, the wording isn't terrible. It probably could be a little cleaner, but conceptually, this is a lot clearer than some of the other problems we had with version 3.
I have no complaints about this one. It's all good. The only thing is, like, slip away. Is there a special feature? Put in bold. Otherwise, leave it as is, right? You know, it's all good.
A battle cruiser designated as a raider cannot attack opposing naval units together with other units. It just can't do it. We're in raider mode. We're not helping you shoot at that guy.
Right.
You guys, you handle it.
Okay, so what pops into mind with this one here is, when do you come out of raider mode? Was that listed on the top there? Because this is in combat mode.
Designated as a raider by placing a marker underneath during the combat movement phase.
Okay.
It does not. So, actually, that's a good point.
So when do you come out of it? Like, it might list on the bottom, but it should almost be listed at the very top as well.
Okay, here it is actually here.
Can you take it off? Yeah,
actually, I would like this. This is a good example. That paragraph should probably be up here.
Up top, right? So with examples, you usually, for me anyways, if I feel like I comprehend everything, I sometimes skip the examples, right?
Yeah.
Now this
paragraph should be before the examples.
And honestly, it kind of fades in the italic and the non-italic, kind of fades in together for me. I think I
almost missed it.
Yeah, I almost missed it there too. Yeah. So it should be up top. Right. Anyways,
all right.
We're being hypercritical of this, guys, because new feature, it's interesting and intrigues us.
But this is the sort of thing that if it's confusing us, it's going to confuse other people. Okay. Now, I know there are jackasses out there that'll sit here and say, well, you guys are dumb if you can't figure that out. And my response to that is you're an asshole. And you are factually incorrect. You've played with, we've both played with players like this who are like, you say, well, I don't know if that's, how can it possibly be that way? Look, historically it worked. It's I don't care what happened historically. Here's what the rule reads. It turns out they're wrong. It's like, when you actually get a proper clarification from the actual source, they're wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. And man, do they hate you for it. They hate you for being right when they were the ones calling you stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, we both can name names right now. We're not going to, but there it is. So I don't want to hear people say, well, you guys can't read rules properly or whatever. You know what? If that's your response, I don't want to hear it, because you know what?
Yeah.
Not everybody thinks the same way. Not everybody's brain that works the same way. Okay. I won't go there, but anyway, that's a
Well, and
That's
honestly,
a
manuals should be,
quasi-fascist attitude. Okay,
yeah, fair enough.
I went there.
You went there, yeah. You
Yeah.
pulled out that card. Well, my thinking is like rule books should be fairly clear enough that the person on the first time read through, because it takes a long time to read a rule book, you should be able to comprehend a lot of what you're reading first time read through. And the easier you can read it, the less complex, the less questions you have, the better off you are, right? And a more enjoyable game for everybody. You don't want everybody to have to read a rule book like 4 times and then read the errata and read the FAQ to actually grasp what it is. Like that's way too much stuff. You want somebody to devote the time to read the rule book and be done with it and
you
walk
know,
away.
we're gonna digress one more level, because we're on this topic, and well, you and I have talked about this a lot. People have said to me, in all seriousness, well, there's no way the rule book can cover all the possibilities. I'm like, that's not correct. That's not correct. In what reality is it? Okay, I play a lot of board games. Global War is another board game to me. Okay, and I'm not explicitly picking on Global War. I'm picking on the concept that people have put towards me. But Global War is another board game. So when I sit down to play it, I expect it to adhere to the same levels of clearness and understanding as any other board game.
Sure. Yeah.
And I've played other board games with my board gaming group where we all sit down, we play a game, and it is a disaster, and we put it away, and we say, nope, we're not going to do that again. That game's not worth playing. And people, and now if you go online and you say, well, look, this board game was, we could not play this board game because it couldn't make sense. Whatever that board game is, we couldn't do it because it makes sense. And people say, well, it's not the rules responsibility to be clear and concise and have you understand it. They can't possibly cover, like, yes, they can. That's the point of a rule book.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to accept that argument.
Yeah. The problem there is that
that does not mean that there are not fantastic games out there that don't have problems with the rule book, don't have issues with the rule books. There absolutely are, but those games are worth playing in spite of sometimes mistakes that make it, or errors, or and some game companies absolutely. You go back and they start getting blowback, and it's like, look, I want to play your game, but man, this rule book, they'll reissue the rule book. They will redesign the rule book from the ground up and say, you know what? We are listening to you people. Here you are.
The rule book is essentially the engine of the ship that runs, right? Like everything else is just the features. It looks nice and it's fun to sail around, but the engine is really kind of what gets you where you want to go. So it needs to be well done, right? My thinking is like that. People take that statement like the rule book can't cover everything. They're taking the rule book, of course, can't cover everything. Submarine can't bring you coffee. It's not going to be written inside the rule book, right? But within reason and within the structures of the board game. It can bring you
milk.
Well, fair enough, right? But within the structure of the board game itself, it indeed can cover a good bit of what's available. Now, it can't cover it in great detail. It can't go over every single unit and say, well, infantry cannot naval transport units to Australia. Like it can't say that in the rule book. That's too extensive. But within reasonable bounds of what people understand in the rule book, yes, it can cover everything, just not everything to absurdity.
It had better cover everything. Now, yes, it is possible that there's some obscurity over here. This goes back to my keyword statement earlier. Once you create a concept, if you stay consistent with that concept through the rule book, you will end up pretty close to where it should be. Okay. But if you don't do that and you start just tacking on bizarre rules here and there to cover exceptions rather than making sure that those situations stay in line with the main flow of the rules, that's where you get a lot of problems. That's where you get a lot of problems. And I've seen this with a lot of board games where it's just like, okay, you're playing, everything makes sense, and then bam, and it's like, wow, what is this? Shit. Games Workshop. half their games are like that. Half their games are like that.
Fair enough.
It's like, oh yeah, core concept. You roll dice, add this modifier, deals damage, great. Oh yeah, but then there's this thing over here that's just complete crazy randomness. It's still a fun game, right? Isn't this fun? No, it's not, because this doesn't even jive with the core rules.
Me and you tried to play this game not long ago, right, on Tabletop Simulator, and I like it. It's a very enjoyable game, but it's one of those games like, there's so many exceptions to the rules. Like, well, everybody's in supply in these conditions, except for these guys. And the first turn is completely different from all the other turns, and you know, this is what you can do here. It's just so much randomness thrown into there. I really like the
it's
game.
trying to be ultra historically accurate.
Fair enough, yeah.
And there is a group of people who will like that game. I did not. And I get why it's a popular game. I get why people love it. I am not saying that they shouldn't. I would never give that game a bad review because it wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
But it was not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
For a variety of reasons that I could analyze.
Let's move on.
But anyway, my point being is don't. Yes, the rule book damn well should be able to cover everything.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
it damn well better be able to.
Yeah.
So,
Battlecruiser die roll.
Both players roll a d12 using below modifiers. The highest die wins. In the case of a tie roll, again, if there's more than one battlecruiser designated as a raider in a zone, roll each one separately. So battlecruisers just being on as a raider +8. So they've got pretty good odds of just slipping by.
Yeah.
And then modifiers. Now it does explicitly say these are cumulative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
+6 if you've got radar, +4 for aircraft in the C zone, +1 for each surface warship per surface warship.
Now this might be a dumb question. This might be a dumb question. Okay, but cumulative is good. I like that, right? You know, that makes sense for ships. Yeah. You know, per ship in the C zone, per aircraft in the C zone, that also makes sense. Per developed radar technology. Okay, so if the Americans and the British are in a C zone with what?
No,
right? Like,
I think this is okay. Both players roll the highest. Okay, I see what you're saying. Who rolls when there's multiple nations present?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And is radar technology cumulative?
I think, yeah. That should, oh, well, okay, let's read the examples. Maybe that'll answer that question, but it should probably, but maybe it should be clarified. All right, example, a British fleet consists, okay, actually, before we read these examples, let's finish reading the rules before we read the example.
Right.
In the beginning of the owning player's combat movement phase, a battle cruiser can be taken off its rating designation by removing the raider marker. It can be used for other purposes in the same turn. Okay, so once designated as a raider, it stays a raider all the way to the beginning of the next combat phase, and then you make that decision again.
Right.
Okay, that's actually pretty.
Yeah, that's good. One thing too is there's other issues, like maybe it's listed in the unit stuff. We don't really know at this point. I mean, we don't, but from looking at it with new eyes, battlecruiser, what are their other abilities? Well, shore bombardment. Can they shore bombard as raider? It wasn't listed up here. So maybe that's why the units should be above, unit chapter should be above this.
Well, okay. I don't even see the point of this ability in this case. Is it like you're just running past enemy ships? Well, I envisioned it as you're actually raiding something.
Yeah, that's true.
And maybe we do need to go look at the battle cruiser at some point, and maybe that'll answer.
My thinking is like, is there a reason to ever pull it off of raiding ability? I mean, yeah, if people are attacking that sea zone where you have ships, okay, that's one reason. Like say the Japanese, they might want to not keep them on raiding ability all the time because that way that they're not hit. But say the British fleet, I mean, you see what I'm trying to, I don't know. I'm
not really sure.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a use for this ability as of right now. Let's read the examples.
Okay.
A British fleet consisting of one battleship, one light carrier with a fighter, and one heavy cruiser, and 2 destroyers attacks a German fleet consisting of a battle cruiser designated as raider with 2 destroyers. The British player decides he wants to engage the battle cruiser and rolls a 4. With modifiers, his total equals 13. The German player rolls a 4 for a total of 12. As the British player won the die roll, all ships are moved to the battle board and naval combat occurs with everybody.
Right.
Had the British player rolled a 2 instead, the German player would have won the battlecruiser die roll, and the German battlecruiser wanted to slip away. The British fleet would only have been able to engage the 2 destroyers. So that example is pretty straightforward.
Scroll up for a second. I should have this open up on mine too. Okay. Like one thing that this one here is, okay, so your modifiers are 4 + 4 + 5. Why? Why is it 4 + 4 + 5?
For one surface warship, battleship, light carrier, or battleship, heavy cruiser, and 2 destroyers. There's your first 4.
Mm-hmm.
Light carrier, I don't think counts as a warship, does it? Because it doesn't have an attack value.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know that's a term that's defined.
Yeah.
Then the fighter adds 4.
And what's the 5? Because it's not radar.
1 light carrier with a fighter, 1 heavy cruiser, and 2 destroyers. A checker. Rolls up 4. So 4 plus 4. Maybe. Okay. Well. Okay. Maybe that first 4. The first 4 is. Okay.
See, that example leaves us with questions, right?
I see what happened. Okay. With
Okay.
modifiers,
right?
This totals 4 plus 4 plus 5 equals 30. Okay. The first 4 is
he rolls a 4.
The second 4 is the fighter.
For ships.
The 5 is the ships. And apparently light carriers do count as a warship.
Right. Okay. So it's good. It was my misread of the situation, but one of the illustrative things was
and then you done fucked me up too.
Well, right, yeah, but see, that could happen.
Yeah.
What a person should do is throw it in a parenthesis and say 4 for the die roll, 4 for the air, and 5 for this. Because I was looking at that, I was like, is that a misprint? Because where's the radar? Oh, there's no radar. Okay, so it's that's what it is, right? And it wasn't immediately clear to me, right?
Let's read the second example. A battle cruiser in C zone M2 wants to slip by a heavy cruiser and a light cruiser in C zone M4 to reach C zone M8, which contains 2 undefended naval transports. The battle cruiser is placed on a radar marker and moves into C zone M4. Battle cruiser die roll is made. The raider successfully slips through. He may move to C zone M8 and attack the naval transports. Okay, so he slips by the 2 destroyers here. He slips by them, goes and sinks the destroyers or the transports, and then if they want to engage him, he's still in raid mode. So if they want to engage them on their turn, the British player wants to engage him on their turn. They still have to catch him. They still have to catch him.
That's right.
By making a battle cruiser roll.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's one use for battle cruiser, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, that is really good. Wow.
Okay, well, that answered that question at least a little bit.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. We'll just have to play with it. My first instinct is, I don't know, is this really going to be that useful? Is it really going to kind of come up that often? Maybe it will. Maybe it's the sort of thing that a good experienced player will go and look at the board and go, I see it. I see an opportunity here to really screw you over by cutting off your fleet, sinking something, and then your ability to go back and pick up units and keep, some way of really disrupting. Yeah, you're probably going to sink my battle cruiser if you're a little lucky, but so be it. At least it really got in there and did circles around your fleet while you were trying to catch it.
That's right.
That makes a little more sense.
It does, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it gets you to force your opponent to spread his units around a little bit more. Let's quickly talk about this thing about well, I guess my only issue with that would be submarines why am I talking about submarines? Battle cruisers, do they still get to amphibious assault or assist in the amphibious assaulting, right? And perhaps not.
I think no. Well, actually, that is a good question. That should be clarified. Yeah, I don't think they'll be able to. I think that'll ultimately be the ruling. I think that's. I already foresee my group saying, I don't know about that.
No, now, if you but it should be listed up here. A battle cruiser that decides to go on raider mode cannot support amphibious assaults or something like that, right? You just throw a little line out there, and that would cover that.
Now, if you could. Now, then again, I also don't quite know I don't know the historical. I don't know naval warfare as well as I do ground warfare. Right. So I'm sure there are examples of where this makes perfect sense that people could point out. But because when it says it's being a raider, obviously, okay, you slip by the line, just sink some transports. But what else can it, and should it be able to go after convoy lines, raid ports, things like that?
Assistant blockading.
That makes me say I would like to see that, but then again, I don't have a full grasp of where what the actual basis for this ability is. Right. And I think that's important to have. Yeah. Other than what I can talk about, what I think sounds cool.
Yeah. But and another thing is can it assist in blockading? Because
that's a good question, because somebody acting as a raider, in theory, it still kind of makes sense because you're not engaging main battleships, but you can still sit there looming off the horizon.
That's right.
And, hey guys, we get more than a mile away from our port, we're done for, because that battle cruiser moves fast.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Battle cruisers did move fast.
Yeah.
In terms of their capabilities.
And when you're looking at blockading, it says 3 or more surface warships of the same alliance in the sea zone. It doesn't say anything about being raiders or not, right? So it's one of those questions that need to be
answered. That is a good question, though. Yeah, that's some of that little nuances that are worth kind of clarifying.
Timer.
Timer. We're going to stop recording here, re-up, and then we got a little bit more to do.
Right on.
So. All right, we're good.
We good? Okay. All right. So take it away.
All right. Convoy escorts. Now, this was a contentious one in version 3 because the rules were very unclear. And I remember during Crimson Tide, every single player there realized we were playing it wrong. Every single one of us. Not one of us was doing it right.
Weird, right? 3 years in or whatever it is.
3 years in. This is a lot clearer. So surface warships in a sea zone with a convoy line running through it belonging to a nation within their alliance may be designated as escorts. They may move up to their full movement before being designated. They cannot perform other combat movement the player turn they are being designated. Escorting ships protect all members of the alliance they are aligned with. Each escorting ship gets 1 defensive roll against raiding submarines in the sea zone they are in. Refer to 10.9. We need more of that right there. Enemy units may ignore escorting ships when moving into or through a sea zone. So they're non-existent for enemy warships. Or when attacking other units in that sea zone. Enemy units may ignore escorting ships when moving into or through a sea zone, or when attacking other units in that sea zone. It is up to the attacking player to decide if he wants to. Okay, that's different.
Yeah.
If he wants to engage escorting ships or not. If he chooses to engage the escorting ships, they defend together with other units in the sea zone in regular combat.
I think this was in version 3.
Yes.
Pretty sure.
Yeah, but it didn't work the same.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
A surface warship may be taken off its escort designation at any time during the owning player's turn. That was the confusing part.
Yeah.
That was one of the big confusing parts. The other one was how they defend and whatnot. Now, before they just defended. If there's an escorting ship there, it defends with all the other ships. Now it's up to the attacker.
Oh, I see.
The attacker may not want to deal with the escorting ship. They may want to because when you first look at a sea zone, you may go, okay, well, I got 2 destroyers there on escort duty, and then these other 2 ships.
Right.
Well, that looks formidable. But when you decide to ignore the escorting ships, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I'll go wipe out those other 2 guys.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So there is a liability there. However, now a surface warship may be taken off escort duty anytime during the owning player's turn. That was the real confusing part.
Yeah.
So now at the start of my turn, I basically can, at any point, I can, all right, he's going off escort duty and he's going to just go over here and do something else. And that was one of the big problems that I had with the way it was written versus subs and rating. And we talked about this, about the way that escorting ships were tied up forever doing escort duty, and subs could do whatever they want whenever they want without penalty. It was a huge problem. To the point where, like we were talking earlier before we started filming, I was getting to the point where I didn't feel it was worth it for Britain to defend its lines. It just wasn't worth it. You defend a couple key points, and then that's it.
That's right.
You just ignore everything else because you're putting in 75% of effort for 25% return.
Can I just say that in regards to convoy escorting and the whole concept of defending convoys, I think people get it wrong. I think people think that they need to lock down and escort everything all at once. I think what people need to do first, limit, cage, push back, and take care of business that way, right? Like they try to lock everything down all at once. No, the trick is you need to limit the submarine spread before you can start securing your convoy lines. That's my take on the situation. I think people get that one.
Yeah,
wrong.
and I think there's I think once version 4 comes out, I think there are numerous videos to be made about how to approach convoy raiding as the defender, as the attacker, and whatnot. Because I did something very particular in Crimson Tide, which a lot of people said they felt was pros and cons. They're like, wow, you're spread out all over the place. That's not a good idea. And other people were like, well, no, you're really pushing his subs to the edge, and they're having very little impact. In that regard, there are plenty of other issues.
There's probably different strategies for it.
Yeah, but I also had a priority system in place where, first it's it's those key points like right off the Gibraltar that you've got to defend that. Otherwise, the amount, and I'm assuming it's going to be roughly the same in version 4, where otherwise Germany puts 2 subs there, and if you've got nothing there, well, then they don't have to build another sub for the rest of the game practically. But barring bad die rolls, they're just going to rip your economy to shreds with the investment of two maybe 3 subs. So you really need to defend that. But once you force his subs out, things become a little more riskier. They have to start making cost analysis benefit. Where is airplanes at to come out on map and things of that nature. So I was kind of like, okay, those points are the priority. Then I'm going to lock down the Canada to Britain line, and then the Britain to Gibraltar line, and then the Mediterranean line, and then and I had a priority system kind of set up in place as more ships became available to me. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of players try to do too much at once. At some point, I think you're just going to have to take your lumps.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think there are times when sometimes they spread their fleets out too far, and then the subs which were going to raid, now they pounce on that small fleet, take out 2 or 3 surface warships, and suddenly you're back to being spread super thin, and then they just go right back to what they're doing. Yeah, you got one turn of relief where they weren't raiding, but they also took a ton of chunk out of you in terms of combat equipment. That's another thing to consider. Now, of course, we don't know the map for version 4 yet, so there's still going to be a lot of we don't know how the convoy lines are going to look.
That's right.
Could be a lot. That's going to have a big impact on things. Well, it could have a big impact in subtle ways.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. Well, I think that covers all this, man. Next up, we're on combat phases.
All right. We're going to roll right into that one?
Yeah. I think so. Well, not today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to be available for the next week, almost 2 weeks for our purposes, because I'm going to be at Knoebels. So
yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be a fun trip. Right on, dude.
So, okay, I do want to ask this though before we leave. Looking at now, any kind of final thoughts on combat movement?
No. Yes and no. Like, the chapter is interesting. I like the chapter. It covers a few different things, but it also, I think it's good. Like, I guess with this thing with battle cruisers, the biggest introduction of things that they put in there. So why did they put in battle cruisers in here? Well, because it's a combat move. You're trying to evade with a battle cruiser roll. You're trying to evade your opponent each time you go through a battle cruiser roll. So they cover that nicely. And that took a bulk of what our discussion was. But it's a new feature, and just the nature of these things is, version 2 had this, version 3 had issues, version 4 is going to have issues, but it slowly improves. Like, if you look at it, the line of how things are improving, things are getting better. So we may have been quite critical of this battlecruiser thing, but that's because it's a new introduction, and we're trying noodling at it from a different direction. So yeah, I think it's a good concept. I don't know how often it'll be used for battlecruisers. It might be one of those things they just shoot your shot and are kind of done with them, because it is a battle cruiser and it's kind of expensive to get out there for. I don't know how much gains the person would get out of it. It's just a convoy raiding role. Wouldn't it be easier just to build a submarine instead of,
it will be interesting to see if some of these now modified ships, like battle cruisers, now that they've got extra special rules to them, which I support, whether or not people pursue them being built, or whether or not they simply go, well, I've got one to start with.
Right.
So I need to familiarize myself with its ability, but I'll never build another one.
Yeah.
Or is it going to be, man, this can have huge impacts if done right. And so, as this nation, I want to build 1 or 2 extra battle cruisers and have them as that option, because I am curious to see how is that going to work out, because there are units that, like right now, it's like for some players, you've got them at the start of the game, but you're never going to build another one.
Yeah, for me, when I break it down to the math, is like, okay, so battle cruiser, if you're trying to do that battle cruiser die roll or that evade slip through roll, so it's +4 for the aircraft and +1 for every submarine, every surface ship, and then radar technology makes it a little bit more difficult too. It's like, okay, so in the example they gave, is like, okay, you want to slip through an enemy fleet to get the naval transports on the other side. If I have a submarine, I could do that just as easily and cheaply, right? Why would I risk a battle cruiser for that rolls 7 attack, 7 defense, 7? That seems to be a pretty pricey unit to just risk at doing a little adventure like that.
And that's what makes me, now maybe you are pinned in by a big fleet, but you have a but then you have a battle cruiser here, but then a destroyer over here, and the battle cruiser slips by, comes over here, then this destroyer comes down, and now you can sink those 2 destroyers that were escorted by just a destroyer.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, so that's what's kind of going through my head.
Yeah,
but again, that goes back to
you're going to be in raider mode, and then they could decide to just engage that destroyer without you being able to fight back as the battle cruiser, right? They could just wipe out
when they come at you. So they'll kill the destroyer. Your raider still has the chance to evade everything, and then he can, in theory, just slip back to the main fleet.
Theoretically, yeah. So there's going to be the odd circumstances, but it's like a submarine could do the job just as easily, I think.
Yes, and that's, but this is also the sort of thing that I'm kind of wondering, though. But then again, on the other hand, maybe you want the extra firepower for the cruiser in that. Maybe there is a reason to have a 7-7 ship sitting there with a destroyer or two, and go, okay, well, now this is a problem. This can hurt me. This isn't just like, you know, a pot shot kind of battle anymore. So again, that goes back to my question: because I know nations will start with battle cruisers. Great, they have this extra ability. I'll use it if I can, but other than that, I will never pursue building battle cruisers. Or are battle cruisers going to become a sought after strategy in a grand strategy kind of thing?
Yeah, we'll have to see, I guess, how it turns out.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm good with things.
I'm good with things as well. Yeah, I think that works out good.
All right, so everybody, this is Winter Mute signing off from the think tank, and we will see you in a couple weeks.
Cheers.